Good afternoon, barely afternoon, but good afternoon and welcome to Faith in the City. There'll be a little more commotion in the room as more people come in and as more chairs come in, but we are very glad that you could join us today. Faith in the City does not typically meet in January right after the holidays, but today we have a special opportunity necessarily rescheduled from December. This forum, Faith in the City, is now in its 8th year, a series of monthly forums on a variety of educational equity issues that have been strengthened over the years by the involvement of perspectives of valued community partners, many of whom are represented in this room. In the lobby, if you would love to be on one more mailing list, pick ours. There's a sign-up sheet, or you could take a QR code that would allow you to sign up for the mailing list of Faith in the City and our Faith in the City Facebook group. Also importantly, in the lobby, cookies and drinks. Help yourselves as you leave. We are delighted that today we hear from Dr. Donald Phipps, new superintendent of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. Dr. Phipps is a veteran North Carolina school leader with more than 2 decades of experience guiding districts through both academic and financial challenges. Beginning in 2018, he served as superintendent of Caldwell County Schools, where he successfully strengthened the district's fiscal footing and advanced student achievement. Before that, he led Beaufort County Schools for more than 8 years. He started his career and rose through the ranks at Cumberland County Schools, a district similar in size and demographics to ours. Known for his steady hand and collaborative approach, Dr. Phipps has built a reputation for navigating complex budget environments with discipline and transparency. In 2023, he was named the North Carolina Superintendent of the Year, underscoring the high regard in which he is held statewide. In addition to district level leadership, Phipps has remained deeply engaged in higher education and in statewide service. He is an adjunct professor at the Wright College of Education at Appalachian State University, a part-time instructor at Caldwell Community College and Technical Institute, and has previously served as a university professor and department chair. His academic credentials prepared him. He has a BA in psychology and management psychology from Methodist College, a master's degree, and certificate advanced study in school psychology from App State, a doctor of education in educational leadership, also from Appalachian State University, and a master of education in instructional systems technology from UNC Charlotte. Through his career, he's also served as a school psychologist, an assistant principal, a principal, an executive director of student services, and nonprofit director of research and development. He served as superintendent advisor to the State Board of Education and is currently president of the North Carolina School Superintendents Association. Following Dr. Phipps' remarks, we will open the floor for questions and responses and aim to have as much conversation in this room as possible. If you're joining us by Zoom, please put your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to try to get to them as well. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Don Phipps to Faith in the City.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. All it means is that I've gotten very old. So I'm in year 32 as an educator, and it's just a wonderful experience and opportunity to be able to serve. My dad was a minister, retired from the Air Force, went into the ministry. And folks often asked me growing up if I was going to be a minister, and I was never called into the ministry. But I feel like I have my own ministry in what I'm doing. I think we all do if we do those kinds of things. There were a couple of questions that were posed that I wanted to address and then be able to give you all an opportunity to ask questions, and I'll do my very best to try to answer them. But one of the questions, and these are very broad and have multiple pieces to them, but number one is, what strategic priorities would you outline for our school system? And if you think about this, our original meeting was scheduled in early December. So I think I was on the ground maybe 6 days when I was going to come in and have a conversation. And what I thought of this week was, how have my answers changed just 30 days out? And I have to say that the reason I was not able to be with you all in December was a tragic loss that we had of a student. And, you know, I pause every time I think about that, and every life is so precious. And the work that we do, I think, gets underscored often by the academic work, but it's all the other things that are out there that are so critically important that we do in our school system work. But I'm glad to be with you today. And I would say strategic priorities that may not show up in a strategic plan, but when I think about where I'm at as a superintendent and where we're at as a school district, number one is rebuilding trust within our communities. And I think that is critically important. I just came from Bolton Elementary School, where our foundation delivered a check in the amount of $1.4 million to our school system to pay for school supplies to help offset some of the issues that we've had with the budget. And very generous contributions from various folks throughout our community have made that possible. And being able to rebuild trust with the community who want to be a part of what we're doing, and to have a hand in the things that are going on. So one of the things that I would say, and this answers the questions a little bit later on, is that I want to make sure that the doors of our schools are open for volunteers to be a part of that. And we don't want to turn you away. And I just from the anecdotal conversations that I've had with individuals, there are some folks that feel welcomed more in some schools than others. And I want to stress to our leadership teams that we want to make sure that we have guests that come in. Certainly understanding the security controls and the screenings and things that we have, but there's just certainly a place for volunteers to be in our schools and to do wonderful things. Another strategic priority is that financial health has to be a top priority. Again, a lot has changed in the short time that I've officially had the title as your superintendent. Addressing the debt is a big deal. We made a payment last month, this week before last, to one of our last vendors that we owe money to. So we sent them a check for $2.4 million. Again, money that was raised by the generous community support. We also put in $375,000 that we now have got built into our budget to pay down debt, the debt that we have. So if you take a look at that versus what we owe ourselves in child nutrition, that big debt number that you all saw a year ago or a little bit less is now down to about $5 million. And my hope is that we'll be able to pay that off. Time frame wise, I would love to think that we've got the resources and the generosity of our community to get that resolved before kids go home for the summer break or when they come back in August. And that idea would be that we can hopefully put that behind us, not to forget what happened, but to get that part behind us and learn from where we are, from what we've experienced, to make sure that we're better and stronger as we move forward. So addressing the debt is something that's a big issue. Reviewing and implementing protocols and procedures. And, you know, part of the questions that I ask are why? Why are we where we are? How did this happen? What do we need to do to make sure that we move forward? And there's some things that are going on that don't have anything to do with me. These were in place long before I got here. But we're doing a conversion in our software in the departments that deal with finance and payroll and purchasing and all of that. There'll be a great deal of help in terms of the work that can be done with technology that's being implemented. But we've got to make sure that the people part of that, the human side of what goes on, that we understand what we need to do, why we need to do it a certain way, understanding standard operating procedures and protocols and things like that that are in place. Because I want to stand in front of you and let you know that we're not going to pay ourselves out of debt and then turn around and be back in it again. The question is, what are you doing different? And I hope that we have a very marked difference in the procedures and protocols that we're following. Building awareness of school finance basics is something that I've done. Again, 16 years as superintendent, I learned early on that the one thing that people don't know as much about, but they think they do until they get into it, is school finance. Very complicated. In fact, finding a chief financial officer is very difficult because the bar is so high on the credentials that an individual has has to have to be able to be in that role. But understanding what the allotment formulas look like in North Carolina, what our funding sources look like from the state, from our county commissioners, from the federal government and the grants that we get. And right now, we probably know less about what long-term federal government support we're going to have just because of the situations in Washington, D.C. So we've got to make sure that we've got ourselves taken care of. I would also say, not only in Forsyth County, but every other county, grant writing is more important now than it ever has been. And it's a bigger part of our board budget than it ever has been. So you've got to be able to tell a story. You've got to be able to have the data to back it up and to do that work. And I think all of that comes into play. And then making key hires. So we've got 3 key positions right now that are open that we're finally starting to get some interest from individuals that have credentials that line up with what the state is looking at. We've had a CFO position open for some time. We expanded that search about a month ago. And I'm hoping that we have some credentialed candidates that we can take a look at and make some moves there. We have a position of executive director in finance. And then we also have a director position in our payroll department. Those are 3 key positions that we have to get put in place and then be able to build the structures around the work that needs to be done. So we're working diligently on that. Another strategic part for me, and I wrote this down, and I don't know if it sounds scriptural or why I came up with the words, but I'm looking at it now, and I did it a month ago, but it was uplifting the downtrodden. What I mean by that is my experience in this school system is that people have been beaten down and they're carrying a heavy load, and it's difficult to be able to do the work that needs to be done because of all the negative that's just surrounding us, the noise and the chatter that we constantly hear. And what I have found is that individuals in our system, I think, are reluctant to celebrate because of all the negativity that's in the air. But what I want to tell you is we've got some great things going on that need to be celebrated. I've been in 3 schools today. We didn't receive a $1.4 million check in every school I went to, but what I'm trying to do is to sit down with principal and leadership team and see through their eyes, the lens, the perspective that they have that's so unique about what some of their struggles are, where they're at, where they're really knocking it out of the park. And I tell my wife, if we had children that were of school age and we were living in this community like I am now, I don't know where I'd want my children to go to school. And I don't say that because there aren't any good schools. I'm saying that because we've got a lot of great schools, and I have seen it, and I've only been in about half of what we have so far. So it's just wonderful, rewarding, and uplifting to be able to get in our buildings and see the good things that are going on. Now, does that mean I'm masking the fact that we've got problems? We've all got problems, and we're working on those kinds of things. I want to be very transparent about what they are. Related to that, I think being a comforter and a counselor to our staff and letting them know that we're trying to work our way through. Folks right now are pensive, they're anxious, and they're afraid that the next shoe is going to drop and what else is going to happen. And I hope, talking to a group this large, that we don't have another shoe that drops. We'll have to manage what we're doing. And because we've got slightly declining enrollment, that's going to have an impact on our budget. And we've got to plan for that now for next year and not wait until next year. I want to be proactive and not react. And I think you've got to know your environment to be able to do that. I want to lift up our board. Our board has been in a situation where they're on the wrong end of the stick on a lot of things in terms of public perception and interpretations of decisions that have been made. They're doing thankless work in very difficult times. And to be able to come in and work with individuals that are committed to that work, I'm just grateful to be associated with them and just want to be able to sing their praises. We're working to enhance the board and superintendent dynamic and the relationship of what expectations are between the 2 bodies and how we work with each other. There's a cadence that you have to figure out. I mean, I've been with a number of boards as a superintendent. Everyone's different. Even after an election, if you only have 1 or 2 board members that change, there's a little bit different cadence with the board, and we'll figure that out. Stabilizing our assistant principal and principal pipeline is incredibly important. I had an opportunity. It's one of the last things I did in Caldwell County. Appalachian State wanted to know if they could bring their principal fellow group up to Caldwell and have me do a presentation. What they didn't tell me was that 14 people that were in that cohort were assistant principal folks in that model from Winston-Salem, Forsyth. So I was really they were given kind of a precursor of what they were going to get And I don't know, they never told me if it was good or bad, but it was great to have an opportunity. And what I shared with them were the 15 things that I've learned that I think are important in terms of school level leadership. And a lot of it goes back to relationships and how you treat people and what your demeanor is like, and being transparent, true to your word, and following through, and all of those things that we call soft skills that are so critically important that we develop in our students, I think are also true in our leaders. But we've got to make sure that we've got a pipeline in place so that we've got the ability to be able to fill vacancies and continue to grow and have strong leaderships along the way. Another issue, not only in this district, but across the state, is chronic absenteeism. And I can tell you, having been around through it, we have not recovered from COVID. And when I say we have not recovered from COVID, that COVID period when students were out and we were in a remote fashion that all of us were really not prepared to go into with no pre-warning, the attendance issue has not gotten back to where we were pre-COVID. And when we've got to work on that and make sure that we can take care of students aren't going to learn if they're not in class and they're not with teachers. If you believe anything about instructional time and the importance of a teacher, students need to be in the classroom. And we want to make sure that they're there. But we've also got to do things on our own to make sure that those classrooms are appealing and they encourage students and they want to be there. And that's what we really want to look for. Something that's important to me, you heard it said that my background is school psychology. I believe that there's a mental health crisis in the world right now that is a larger crisis than we've seen. And I will tell you, before COVID, and I guess in my career now, it's before COVID and after COVID is how I kind of see everything. I was asked to speak at a lunch and learn in Lenore a few years ago with the technology company that asked me to do that. And I was on a panel of about 6 people, and I had question number 4. And I really wasn't worried about question 1, 2, or 3 because I had question number 4 and I was ready when question 4 came up. And the moderator asked a question and then she called my name. And I kind of deer in the headlights look. I thought to myself, I have question 4. We're only on question number 1. But the question was, what's the greatest need? Again, this was before COVID. What's the greatest need that we have in public schools right now? And what the answer was supposed to be, I think, because it was a technology presentation, was that we need laptops, we need technology, we need training, we need this, we need that. And I said, our greatest need is mental health. And again, this was before it was really a focus on all the things that we see now commercially. But almost every problem that I dealt with, whether it was an adult or a student, could be traced back to some kind of a mental health need that we have. And I don't want to politicize that and say that it's one party or another, or I'm using terms that are fluffy. I'm just talking about the mental well-being of people. And that's what I'm concerned about, regardless of what you look like, where you come from, who you affiliate with. I want to make sure that our students and our adults are taken care of. And we have that responsibility, and employee assistance programs are more important now than they ever have been. The ability to make sure that folks reach out and get help and are able to get help. It's one of the areas where our faith partners are able to step in and help us. When we have tragedies at schools, the faith community that steps out and does the ministerial work that needs to be done along with us is incredibly important. So those are things, another one that probably won't excite you very much is that we're working on an updated strategic plan. And we've decided that we're going to do that for 2 years because we feel like there's going to be a lot of transition and a lot that's going to happen. Let's focus on the next 2 years and really be strategically minded about what we want to do, and then do a 5-year plan as we go through that. So we'll be reaching out to get community feedback on what those priorities and goals need to be, and those are very important. The next broad question that I had is, what are some of the initial impressions of the strengths and assets in our system? And I can tell you very, very quickly, it was evident to me that the greatest asset that exists in this county are the wonderful people. And wonderful people in the school system, and wonderful people that are external to the school system that support us in many ways. And it can be the financial support that we've gotten. It can be the talent support that we have. Whatever it happens to be, that the fact that we've got wonderful individuals that are doing incredible things means that good things are going to happen. I've had 2 people ask me today. I had some folks ask me in Caldwell County because I left a great situation. I was not getting out of trouble. I had a situation where I felt led to be here, and I can't always explain why, I feel those kinds of callings, but I felt like there was a reason why I felt led to do the work that needed to be done. Having gotten here, I feel gracious to be given the opportunity to work with wonderful people, because if you don't have wonderful people in place, you've got to assemble that team before you can move forward and start doing great things. And we have great people in places doing great stuff. The generous gestures of groups and officials have been awesome. Elected officials from inside our county and across the state have reached out. I'm going to be going to Greensboro after this meeting to film a TV program to talk about the value of having elected officials in our schools. And we want to do that. But one of the things I'm going to say on that show is that we can't wait until we have a need. We've got to build relationships with our elected officials before we have needs. And it can't always be reaching out and asking for funding support. It needs to be a bi-directional value. And you know, I've had the ability to have folks in the General Assembly that would write bills, and they would send them to me and say, do you mind taking a look at this from your lens and tell me if there's anything in here that may be an unforeseen consequence, unintended consequence, or is there something here that is not addressing a need that we need, or is the bill that I've written to try to meet a need, is it really meeting the need? To be able to be on the front of that, again, I talk about proactive being so important, is valuable, but you got to have relationships with those individuals, and this is across party lines that have reached out, and what they're looking for is feedback, and I want to be able to provide that feedback. Not having my name show up in the bill anywhere, I'm not concerned about that. But being an educator with experience at working at the system level, I want to be able to provide some feedback to our elected officials. The process that we find ourselves in is difficult, to say the least. And I would say it's better right now than it was 12 months ago if we rewind and look at where we are. But we are going to forever be changed as a result of primarily the cuts that had to be made. And whether you agree with them or not, the cuts had to be made to be able to meet the demands that we had on the budget. You know, a very basic economic principle is you've got to live within your means. And we've got an opportunity now to go back and redefine what our means are and what that looks like. And there are going to be some things that we're going to do that will be beyond what the funding that we get from the state. We know that they're important, and we're going to rely on that. I'll be working on a budget for our county commissioners. My goal is to have that done internally by the end of the month of March. I'll have it to them by mid-April. And in that will be reflective of the board's priorities, the feedback that we've gotten from our administrators, our teachers, and community groups. That's something that we met about yesterday, and how we're going to launch that to be able to make sure that the budget that is built is reflective of what the values and priorities are of our stakeholders. What are the opportunities you see buried in this time of financial difficulty for our school system? I think it requires you to take a deep look at everything about the system, how the system operates, where our expenses are, what we're doing in terms of contracted services. We've talked about transportation before I got here and looking at what we do with transportation. I love the idea that we're looking at every program to find out what value that program brings to us. Just because we've had something in place for 30 years doesn't mean that we need to continue to operate that way. But what are we truly getting at? What is the value proposition in terms of the cost that we have to bear to have a program or a service or whatever? And then what are the results that we're getting? And then what are some areas that we'd like to move into that we need to be working on? I would love to see our CTE program flourish and explain to folks that don't understand the opportunities that career and technical education provide to our students, and not just when they're 11th and 12th graders. Our students need to understand careers when they're in elementary and middle school. And I'm not talking about tracking students. I'm talking about making them aware of career opportunities that are out there. And some things that they're going to try out, they're going to strike out. But better for them to find out that they're not great at that than to wait until they go into college. One of the things that was said in the introduction, I was a computer science professor at Pfeiffer University. And I had students that enrolled in the computer science program who shouldn't have been in computer science. It's like a doctor saying, I'm a doctor, but I wasn't very good at science. I'm not sure I want them to do anything with it. These were individuals that weren't good at the ability to think through and do what needs to be done mathematically. And I felt like if I were to just give them grades and allow them to pass and get through when they graduated, they, number one, weren't going to be successful and productive in that role, but they weren't going to be happy either because it wasn't a good match. And I think we have to do that in our roles. We have to look at the procedures that are in place, the mechanics, the workflow. What can we do to tweak the process and make sure that we're doing all the things that we do? It opens the door for difficult conversations. One of the things that the state of North Carolina needs to do at the General Assembly level is fund exceptional children at the level that it should be funded. We're currently funded at 13% of our population, and our population in our county is over 16%. It's not because we over-identify, it's because that's what the population looks like. And every one of those services that those students should get, whether they're a speech service and it's something like that, or if they're severe and profound and they're non-ambulatory and they have, a trach tube or whatever, we need to meet the needs of the students. One of the biggest issues that we have locally, again, in this county and everyone in county in North Carolina, is that we're having to do more on the local side of our funding because the state side of the funding doesn't cover the exceptional children's need that we have. And that would be something that we truly need to look at. How might we help in rebuilding trust again in our school system? I kind of led with that and wanted to get to a wrap-up point here quickly. I would ask you to be witness to our work. We're not going to take any shortcuts because I think sometimes shortcuts get you to an outcome, but when you get there, you realize that you cut off a big portion of procedure and protocol that needed to be followed. And I think we need to go through that and we need to do it well, and we need to be articulate about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and then explain how we got to where we are. I'd ask for you all to be an advocate as you speak to other folks, realize that we've accepted the responsibility for where we are financially. None of us want to be there, but it is what it is. I can't go back and put that back in, the toothpaste back in the tube. We are where we are. We're in a much better place in terms of what that debt number is. But again, what are we doing moving forward to make sure that we don't overextend ourselves in terms of what we have to pay? Be active in system activities. And again, I would include you to volunteer, to be present. There's so many ways to do that. And some would say big roles and small roles. There really aren't any big and small roles. If you're doing something to help our students or support our teachers and educators, then you're doing big role work. And we encourage you to do that, and we want you to do it. And I encourage you to learn more about local school finance and how the legislation related to that impacts our work. In fact, I'm going to make an invitation. I don't know how I'm going to pull this off because I'm not sure what kind of response I'm going to get. But I've created a program that I've done for several years called Budget 101, School Budget 101. And what it is to help individuals who want to know a little bit more about it, understanding what local school finance funding looks like, what our streams of funding look like, how student allocation, how numbers of students, we call that ADM, it's our average daily membership. So how does a school system's ADM determine what they get from the state? And they're very closely tied together. But we get all kinds of allotments. If that's something that you've got an interest in, keep your eyes and ears open. We'll put some announcements out and we'll put something together. I will teach you more about school finance in 1 hour, money back guarantee in 60 minutes. In fact, I know it works because I give a pre-test and a post-test. Yeah. So based on that, I know it's tremendous work. But I think the more you know about that, the more you can understand the things that we're dealing with and why we're having to grapple with some of the problems that we have to deal with and what the allotment formula looks like. So one of the classes that I teach at Appalachian deals with that. And I have the students, the last 4 or 5 weeks of the class, they have to pretend to be in charge of an elementary school. And what I give them is the numbers that they have in every grade level. And there's certain requirements. There are grade level limits that we have in North Carolina that we can't go over in elementary school. And everybody would love to have a teacher assistant in every kindergarten, first and second grade classroom, but you can't because you don't have the money to do it. So what they ultimately have to do in groups is determine how much money they have to work with, and then how do we stretch that out to meet our needs. But the thing that's most important is we start with looking at what the goals, the vision, and the mission is for that organization. Because our vision and our mission should be reflected in what our budget looks like. Because whether you admit it or not, what you spend your money on is where your priorities are. And I would rather be doing that by choice than to be able to say we've got a debt we've got to take care of and wipe out. And we certainly are getting to that place. But the last broad question, then I'll open it up for you all. What are some of the most helpful ways the individuals and organizations in the community can help strengthen our schools? And the first one is very simple but very complex, and that is to get involved. And as many people as we have in the room, what you have to offer is going to be different from every individual. The time that you have to offer is going to vary from person to person. The experience in schools or in education is going to vary, but you don't have to have an educational background. I met an individual an hour ago that was sitting at a table in one of our fifth grade classrooms at one of our elementary schools, who is a business owner and is working that every fifth grade student in that school who raises their proficiency by a year is going to be given a bicycle that this organization is working through. And that individual doesn't have any educational background, but what they're given is their time, and they're there. And he told me that yesterday I had 2 students that came up and said, I really need some help just to be able to sit down and provide tutoring help. You know, be a reading buddy, adopt a class and provide for them in some way, or reach out to teachers and faculty and staff members and say, you're in my thoughts and prayers. And I just want you to know that you're being lifted up from me. Donate. When I say donate what? We'll certainly donate money if we have the ability and needs for us to be able to articulate. I wouldn't want you though to give money and just say I'm giving money to the school system. I would want you to know what you're giving money for, and for us to be able to clearly tell you what the needs are. But not just money, just like we're not going to just ask for funding from the General Assembly. From you all, I would ask that you also donate your time and your skills. You know, there may be some things that you do that are really unique that will be great to have, but that might not be in a particular school that you're thinking about going into, but there may be a specific need for that in another area. And as long as we know what those skill sets are and what you're willing to do, then we can match that up and make magic happen as you work. Adopt a school or classroom, which can be going in as simple as bringing in refreshments or working with the faculty and staff or supporting them in some way. Be a volunteer reader, just to sit down with the group on the carpet. If you're not able to get down and get back up like I am, sit in a chair or wherever, we'd love to have you in the room to do that. Or volunteer to assist in the building for tasks that need to be done. With fewer employees in our buildings than we've ever had, the work never went away. So we've got that same workload with fewer people, and reaching out to a principal and finding out what could you do with an extra set of hands that might be able to be here for 2 hours a week or every other day or whatever it is that you're able to do, and to be able to work on that. With that in mind, what I want to say to you is we are grateful for what you have done, and we're grateful for what you're going to do. And I am here because I want to help. I want to be here as we come out on the other side and we realize that we put the past behind us and we're stronger as a result of that. And it's not going to be because any magic that I have. You've just got a committed, experienced leader that's going to work with a lot of other great people to make things happen to get us to a wonderful place. I told somebody the other day, this is not a throwaway year. We don't have throwaway years. Our seniors who are seniors in high school right now don't have another opportunity to have a senior year. And we can't look back and say, well, 25, 26, we couldn't do this for you because of the financial crisis. Well, that doesn't mean anything to them. It's their senior year and we've got to make it happen. But I would argue that for a kindergartner, it's their kindergarten year, and they don't get another kindergarten year unless they're retained, and we hope we don't do that. What are we doing to pour into our faculty and staff members, our administrators, our people that work at our education office, at central office? That's another thing that bothers me. I don't like the term central office. I love the idea of central services, because I believe the central office, that administrative hub, should be designed to provide services to the people that we are there to serve. That would be faculty and staff members, families, community members, and those kinds of things. So we're going to constantly look at what kind of service are we providing and delivering to the individuals that have the need for that. So I'm going to stop. Again, my dad, being a preacher, would lay his watch on the table. He would say, I got a lot to say today, put the watch down, and then he never looked at the watch again. He knew we were in trouble when the watch got put on the pulpit. I have looked at the clock, and I've got 25 minutes to be able to get you out of here by 1 o'clock, but then be able to take questions. So I saw a hand in the back. Yes, sir.
Don, I have a quick question. I was at Appalachian State Wright College of Education for 31 years as a professor, and when the doctoral program started, was involved in that. But I just want to say your name, they invited me back to be on an advisory committee not long ago, and I've gone on and done other things. I said, I really don't have time, but I did. When I was in the meeting, I want the audience to know that, because we're proud of our reputation, and your name came up. And they said, oh yes, he's going to Winston-Salem. He'll do a great job. He's one of ours. So good luck to you, my friend.
I appreciate hearing that. feel like I'm one of theirs because of the tuition that I pay. Feel like two of my daughters are theirs because of the tuition that I pay. But really what it is when you're long gone from those schools, it's the networking that happens and the ability to be able to lean back on those individuals, professors and administrators. And it's just wonderful. And we've got, and I look forward to creating those kind of relationships with the local universities and colleges that are in our area. You know, one of the things I want to really explore is what kind of relationship do we have with our local community college, because there's a unique opportunity in North Carolina for students to be able to earn college and high school credit at the same time. And then apprenticeship work and internship types of things that I feel like are critically important. So we're looking at all those. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Through what process do you encourage teachers of the first line with students to give feedback to administrators and then to the central services office? What do they call directly, or through what process do you encourage?
Yeah, I think there's a formal protocol in terms of what that looks like, but it's not always as formal as it may appear. Certainly reaching up to the building level administrators, because if it's something that could be handled at the building level, that's where I'd like for it to be taken care of. Again, I rarely have anybody come in and say, I just wanted to tell you you're doing a great job. That's not normally what I get from individuals. So they're already ramped up. They've talked to whoever it happens to be, and they just want answers. And what I found, again, through my career as a principal, and then every other administrative role that I've had, people just want to be heard. And I can't always give them what they ask for, but I can give them my time. And I want to be able to make sure that I'm actively listening to what they say, so that they feel like when they walk out of wherever we are, if nothing else, they've been heard. And I certainly want our teachers to be heard. But working through the building level administrators, we have a network of support at our central office to be able to provide that. But, you know, I hope if folks feel like they're hitting a brick wall and there's not anything that's being done, reach out to me. And I know that I had a conversation with someone in the community over the Christmas break that people are afraid to go to the superintendent or to folks at our building because they think there's going to be retribution. I've heard that in every school district that I've ever been in. And I promise you that nobody's going to be the subject of retribution for me for being a whistleblower or asking a question. But I want you to know I can't solve a problem that I don't know exists. And if there's something out there, I want to take a look at it. What I'm doing, the reason I want to go out in our schools is, number one, I want to be in our schools. I love being in classrooms. I love seeing what's going on. But I'm having individual sit-down conversations with building level administrators. And what I'm taking away from that are what are the prevailing themes that I'm hearing over and over again. And those are going to be things that I'm going to go back to my building and have conversations with our folks about, do you realize this? Because one thing I learned a long time ago is perception is reality. Whether you agree with that or not, whatever the perceiver perceives in their mind, it is their reality. And we've got to work through that in some way, not shove it to the side and say that's not true. Well, it's certainly true to the individual that perceives it that way. So I hope the teachers and whoever it happens to be, when I say educators, for me, an educator is anybody that works with students, a certified teacher, a bus driver, cafeteria worker, school psychologist, principal, whatever. We're educators and we're in it together, and I hope they all feel like they have a voice. People won't feel like they have a voice unless they feel like they've been heard and they see some kind of action take place.
Would you please, for the sake of those online and in the back of the room, just concisely repeat questions and comments before you answer them?
Okay.
Yes, as you know, there is a big election season coming up this year. What are the qualities that you would think would make someone serve as a school board member
Good.
in
That's a
the
great
most
question.
effective way?
So that question for those online, if you couldn't hear it, was what do I feel like are important qualities for an effective school board member? It doesn't have to be a background in education. In fact, I think sometimes folks that haven't been in education bring a different perspective. Now, I think veteran teachers and administrators are wonderful to have because they have a perspective so I think there's a good mixture that you look for. But a business background, understanding how to do that problem solving, being able to collaborate and communicate well, play well with others in the sandbox. I think it's really important that we don't always do as adults. Understanding, and I've rarely seen this be a problem, But with folks, if they're elected by districts, they represent more than just a district. The school board member is there certainly for the area that they're elected from, but they're serving the entire school system. Many come in with agendas and realize that things are happening for a certain way because of certain things. You know, I would love to sit down with anybody who's interested in school board work and be able to share with them. I would not give insider information because I don't have any. What I would do would be to be willing to answer questions and tell folks how things work. When you're dealing with a board of any kind, and again, my dad was a preacher, and I know there wasn't anything more political than a Southern Baptist church in Eastern Illinois. Yet I lived it. I know it's certainly that way when we talk about what happens with school boards, but you don't always have unanimous agreement, and I don't know that we always want unanimous agreement. If we were just to say we're going to put this up and everybody's going to vote for it and we move on, I think there's healthy discussion that can happen. And out of that healthy discussion and out of the questions that are asked, you learn a lot. And I think part of that is the piece that the public needs to be a part of so that they can hear that and understand what's going on too. But I think all of those things are important. There's not a prototypical version of any individual. I think the different qualities and traits that folks can bring to the table, when we put that all together, it's like a patchwork on a quilt. And when you look at it, it's a quilt. When you look at the individual panels, it's made up of something different, but we're all kind of quilted together doing the work of public education. My biggest thing would be, as long as the individual has the best interest of the students and staff that we serve at heart.
Amen.
And not a political stepping stone, that would be more important than anything. And I feel like our board, I've been very fortunate to work with wonderful people and certainly am now.
You said several times you want us to be involved in the schools, and just for some schools that's like Bolton, they welcome you to do anything. I'm at Knollwood and we have a partnership with them. Other schools are not so much wanting parents in there. And last year at school I was trying to help, they said they'd never had parents. They're recently in the classroom, just so you're aware. They did work on that. I said, that can't be. And I ended up working with a wonderful teacher, but I was the only one. They used people in the libraries, but working with kids and with didn't happen. So
that comment again for those online was that some schools seem to be more accommodating and welcoming to volunteers coming in, and others have a greater volunteer pool to pull from. And what I would say to address that is we have a greater need now in terms of the work that needs to be done inside the building. And what I want to encourage is that our principals and our administrators make their schools available. Again, with the understanding that there's certain criteria that have to be met for a volunteer to be able to come in. But that may be working with a group and packing non-perishable food items to send home to students. Or again, it could be sitting down and helping a student understand how to reduce a fraction or anything in between. We want to make sure that we're not turning folks away because the need is there. And we want to make sure if we've got schools that have not been as welcoming, we just want to make sure, again, this is the perception. And surely there are needs that are there. So let's make sure that we respond and we take care of that.
As you have mentioned already, there's going to be some significant turnover in the school board through this next election cycle. We don't know how significant, but to your point, even just a couple of new members, which we know we'll have at a minimum, will change the dynamic. So my question is, have you thought about, since you have so much experience working with school boards, helping to come up with a plan for transition to get our new school board members up and running once they've been elected and before they actually start in January?
So that question was about a transition plan, communication with the board, however it's going to be configured after the election. And the answer to that is yes, and as recently as yesterday. So we've put on our calendar already for December of 2026, 2 days where we're going to do professional development for our new board members. There's also an opportunity that's provided by the North Carolina School Boards Association that shows new school board members the ethical part of doing the work, the legal part of doing the work, and then some of the other unwritten things that may be out there that board members need to be aware of. But I'll make myself available in that role for that purpose, but also, individual conversations and being able to talk to folks about what questions they have. And a lot of times folks will come in and they don't want to ask because they don't want to show they don't know. And I want people to be comfortable enough around me to be able to say, Tim, I really don't understand school budgeting, or I don't understand the student code of conduct, or what is a North Carolina standard course of study, or whatever it happens to be. And I want to be able to have those conversations with those individuals and make them as informed as they can be. But that's critically important. Yes, ma'am.
Back to the volunteer question, I think with the reduction in staff, one problem is that there may not be a person at the school level equipped to coordinate and plan for how to use volunteers. And so sometimes volunteers get there and there's no system or no suggestion as to what they need to do or how to do it. So how can you and those in the central services location help the principals, the assistant principals, and others step into that void that's been created by reduced staff?
So that question with reduction in force, when we may have volunteer coordinators or people who have that as a job responsibility or a role that aren't with us anymore, how do we handle
Very
that?
cool.
I think the easiest way is to say
Well,
that every school
Back to
will
it for sure. Yes.
who's doing that work. And I would, if I'm a principal, I'm thinking this is incredibly important work, and I want to make sure that we're getting that taken care of. So I will find out who might not have that, or who might not have a person identified as that, and make sure that we do moving forward. Everybody who calls, who reaches out, that wants to help, we need to make sure that we're responsive to that. And we find, and again, it may not be in the school they're calling, but it could be that we plug them in somewhere else. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I hear you saying that you want volunteers, which is really amazing. And I guess my follow-up question to that would be, what about community organizations that are already organized to provide support for mental health or children with special needs or conflict resolution or anything of that nature? Is there an openness from the school district to also allow community partner organizations to come provide that support in school buildings as well?
So that question was about partnerships in addition to individuals that come in and support. I believe in partnerships as long as the day is going to be around. I want to make sure that if I'm breathing, I'm looking for partnerships. There's some things that we can't do legally, and I think we have to know what the limits are in terms of working with students or providing services. And as long as we understand that and we know what the goal is, then we can work that out. I had an individual in the community that met with me and a number of folks that are in the Forsyth County Athletic Hall of Fame, and that has a different name, and I can't remember what that name is, but these are former coaches and players that want to go into our high schools and be positive role models for our students. And I don't know in the past if they've not been allowed to do that, but we had a meeting and we said, we want you to be able to do that, but there's certain things that we can and can't do. A preacher, for example, when they go into the school, can't proselytize. You can't do the preacher gospel preaching part in our schools, but you can certainly render services and minister in other ways. And I think as long as individuals know when they come in that there are limits on certain things that can be done, then we can work out what that MOU looks like and how we meet it. But we clearly, I said it earlier, we can't meet the goals by ourselves. So to be able to leverage partnerships and to have groups that have that kind of experience and expertise to come in is something that we greatly need. Something that I saw, again, I've been around a long time, ADHD was a condition that kind of started and went through, and it was like there was a rash of ADHD, and then it kind of fell off. Right now, the identification that seems to be attaching itself to a lot of students is autism. And as we work with students who are autistic, or students who are what we call the autistic spectrum of where they are, we have greater needs in that. And that may be part of some of what you're talking about that we have to deal with. And with reduction in EC spots, because that was an area that was over budget, but sometimes I think we cut deeper than we can afford to cut in terms of being able to live and move forward and thrive. You know, we've lost a lot of those services. So those things exist that are out there that we've got to work on. And we've got to find ways to be able to not only take the strengths that we have, but be able to leverage those that exist within the community and work on that. Something else that districts across North Carolina have not done as well, and I can't speak about Winston-Salem Forsyth on this, but there are Medicaid services that are being provided in our schools as we do psychological evaluations and we do different things that are done, speech services and OT and PT and things like that. We've got to make sure that we're billing Medicaid for those services just to be able to get that reimbursable amount back to be able to offset the cost of the individuals that are doing that. And again, I may be speaking of that and it may be being done well, but that's something that we need to look at. And I think those areas may come into play too. Yes, sir.
Doc, I just want to push the issue a little bit further. We've heard several comments from the one just made relative to what I call this double-edged sword, right, of local school autonomy. That it obviously provides the space for local school principals to address the particular needs there, but then it also creates this dynamic where, as we said earlier, some schools' leadership is very welcoming to the partnership that you've endorsed, and others, can all but have a wall up to that because of whatever the disposition is of that local leader. And so I've heard you talk about encouraging this. Certainly past recent, superintendents have encouraged this as well. But I really think there's going to have to be a further conversation and push it further in terms of how to create a culture where across the board in all of our schools, leadership understands that obviously within the various parameters, the FERPA and the rules and the protocols, the community, organizations, individuals are an indispensable asset to every single school at every single level, right? And not something to kind of be catch as catch can from school to school.
Yeah, again, that comment is about making sure that we've got the culture in place. And I would argue that with autonomy, you're not giving anything up. I think you're getting stronger by letting folks in. And I don't know if that's something that we've got to overcome. I think part of that would be individual conversations with individual principals. As I get feedback that we have schools that may not be as inviting or welcoming, I want to deal with that. Yeah. But I certainly endorse it and will continue to do that because it makes things much better when we've got the community involved and stakeholders playing a role. Yes, sir.
The CDC just recently released a revised immunization schedule, which has a lot of implications for the protection of school children. Does the state of North Carolina have any say about required immunizations, or are there any immunizations that still are required for school entrance? That used to be a real catch point for getting children immunized. I'm not sure where that stands now.
Yeah, that was a question about immunization and some of the CDC work and whether or not there are requirements for immunization. Unless it's changed, and I'm looking at my folks that know this kind of thing, we have a requirement for immunization when students enter kindergarten, and we have another requirement that they have when they become sixth graders. And so we take a look at that, and there are certain exceptions that can be provided for religious reasons and things like that, but there are, I don't know off the top of my head what they are in terms of the vaccinations that students have to have, but they still exist. And those are, as far as I know, are written in state law. And that would be something that would be picked up from a legislative standpoint. But I understand the value of that and the fact that we want to make sure that students are immunized, they have vaccines. Yeah, man. I'll be able to say that when I get in the car. I just can't say it right here. But yeah, great question. Yes, sir.
Yeah. In talking about school psychologists and that sort of thing, I had a thought over the last few weeks. Last year, we had a situation where the county, the school district ended up owing the county $5 million for school nurses and sheriff's deputies working as SROs, because the county gave the district the money and the district was supposed to give the county the money back, and they didn't. And so the county took that back under their budget, and it doesn't even appear on our budget, the district budget. There is so much need for services that aren't really education. What are your thoughts on, and not outsourcing that, but maybe school psychologists should be, as school nurses are, county employees. Social workers should be county employees. I mean, we have counselors, obviously, that might make referrals, and it makes sense for those services to be provided in the school because that's where the kids are. But does it need to be part of the school budget?
So that was a question about some of the services that are provided by specialist professionals that aren't academic in nature. That would be social workers, psychologists, speech pathologists, just to name a few. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. The services are the most important part that we would look at. I can tell you across the state, just because I was a school psychologist and was executive director in Cumberland County, that districts do that differently. They fall under different departments. and the funding for that comes in different ways to be able to make that happen. SROs are different as well. Some are funded by safe schools funding that we get from the state, and then some federal money that we have. The majority of those around North Carolina are covered by money that we get from our county commissioners. So that money comes from the county commissioners, and then we pay it back to the county commissioners, which is kind of what you're talking about here. But I'd have to think through that and look at that. But we're willing to have any of those conversations. We want to make sure that we have the individuals that we need in place to do the work that needs to be done. And having been a school psychologist, I know that a traditional psychologist who's got a degree to be able to do counseling services is not necessarily trained to do the work that a school psychologist does, and their specialty skills that we have, and that's why they've historically fallen where they have. Yes, sir.
Just to pick up on the point of charitable organizations or outside organizations working with the schools, I'm on the board of the Salvation Army, and for those of you that don't know, we have a great relationship with the schools. It was a little strained this past year because of the lack of bus drivers, but at the end of the day, 160 kids are bused over to the Boys and Girls Club. And we have tutors, we have readers, we have people that work with the kids there to get their homework done. And then their parents pick up the kids at the Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club. It's now called the Red Shield Club, but the Red Shield Club. And it's a great way for other organizations to be able to work with the school system. From a volunteer standpoint, since there are a number of men in here and women who are of age, I would suggest that some of you that are good volunteer and get your commercial driver's license and volunteer to drive a bus, because that is a huge problem that our school system has, just to get kids back and forth. So I've talked to, I'm a retired Army guy. I've talked to a bunch of retired Army guys who are actually right now taking the CDL, commercial driver's license, and to volunteer their time for us.
So that comment was about Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club after school activities, and we're grateful for all of those. And we have churches that provide that. We have other civic organizations. They extend learning. They provide mentorship to the students that they work with, invaluable time spent, very rewarding, certainly for the adults and for the students. And then the CDL part, we would love for everybody in the room to go sign up for their CDL and be willing to drive school buses. I drove bus 124 in Cumberland County when I was in 12th grade. Can you imagine us having high school students drive buses? Just how quickly the world changes in terms of what's acceptable versus not. But it is just at 1 o'clock, and I want to respect your time. I can't thank you enough for being here to lead the morning.
Dr. Phipps, your time with us, you could be seated for 1 minute. So we can say thanks one more time. This time has been substantive, clear, committed. That you gave half of your time to dialogue, I think demonstrates that commitment to active listening. We're glad for the expertise that you bring. We're glad for your presence in our community. And together we want to say thanks one more time. Faith in the City meeting will be Tuesday, February 3rd in this space at noon. And Paul Robeson-Ford, Reverend Robeson-Ford, if you would raise your hand at the February 3rd Faith in the City, the vital community organization Action for Equity will share the recently launched How Are the Children initiative and invite us into a bold challenge. The sentence actually reads a bold $100 million challenge. Invest in the organizations already doing the work of reaching young people and their families who are most impacted by poverty. So come back in a month for another substantive discussion. Dr. Phipps, you're invited back too. But we also want you to get on with your extremely important work in our community. Thanks so much. Thanks to you all.